I was a flight engineer on the Catalina flying boat, the PBY. I survived the Pearl Harbor Raid, then went to the Battle of Midway, flew 48 missions over Guadalcanal, was transferred to Europe, flew a B-24 over the English Channel and the Bay of Biscay, which is the western coast of France, flew 56 missions. I've seen devastation that I will never forget. Thank you very much. My name is Jack Holder. I was born December the 13th, 1921, in a small town 15 miles from Dallas. I grew up during the Great Depression. You can imagine what it was like. Gasoline was 15 cents a gallon. My father was a farmer. We lived in a four-room shack that my father built. No running water, no toilet, no telephone. Farming, to me, is all work and no money. Farming was not going to consume my life. Joined the Navy April 24, 1940. When I was 6 years old, there was people talking about Lindbergh. I always wanted to fly. I applied for and was accepted for 4 months of training in San Diego in the aviation machinist mate school. At the end of it, on December the 6th, I was aboard the Platte, which was a U.S. naval tanker loaded with 6 million gallons of fuel oil, headed for Pearl Harbor. I can't tell you how beautiful Hawaii looked at that time. You can imagine what it looked to a Texas farm boy who had seen nothing but cotton fields and cornfields. I thought I was in paradise. I was immediately taken to VP-23 PBY squadron based on Fort Island. 4 months I spent in the beach crew. I was then assigned to an aircraft crew as a waist hatch gunner and a first mechanic. Spent another 4 months in that position. At the end of that, I was promoted to what the Navy called plane captain, flight engineer. And that's where my career started. I had the duty that day. The section leader began roll call. We heard a screaming aircraft, and moments later, a terrible explosion. We ran outside. The first bomb that fell on Fort Island hit VP-21 hangar, which is only 100 yards from mine. All of our aircraft were parked between the two hangars. And incidentally, these were new PBYs. They were only 2 weeks old. We just returned from San Diego. Half of them were on fire. One of my shipmates remembered there was a sewer line behind there under construction. He says, "Let's go for the ditch. Follow me." Well, ran, jumped in the ditch, sat there clinging to each other. One of the pilots seen us, strafed the ditch with machine gun fire, missing us by probably 3 feet. He hit the dirt piled up beside the ditch. When I came out between the two waves, which were an hour and 15 minutes apart, I could look up Battleship Road, seen the Arizona listing and sinking, the West Virginia, Tennessee, Maryland, Utah, California. I seen the Oklahoma turtle up, but I seen devastation that I will never forget. It was the most horrible thing I've ever seen. I seen shipmates aboard these ships that had been torpedoed were diving off of the ship, diving into water which was covered with oil and on fire. Most of them died in the water. Some of them died when they reached the beach. It was horrible. Martial law was declared in Hawaii. There was a complete blackout over all of the Hawaiian Islands, and machine gun pits constructed from sandbags were set up all around Fort Island. I had the pleasure, along with 2 shipmates, to man one of them for 3 days and nights. We had no idea where the Japanese fleet was or if they planned on returning. On the 4th morning, we were allowed to return to our barracks. All lockers had been broken open to retrieve white clothing for bandages. Everyone was given a postcard with 2 inscribed inscriptions. The first one said, "I've been wounded." The second one said, "I'm okay, don't worry." My mother received this card 14 days later. She got on her knees and prayed to God if he would save her son. She'd spend the rest of her life working for the church, and she did.
America is at war. Our enemies, Japan, Germany, and Italy, are out in the open. the nation prepares to protect its traditions and its way of life, to guarantee that its children shall not become chattels of an inglorious German-Japanese state. The Japs gained an initial advantage by their surprise assault, but they'll pay and pay. Those who gave their lives that fateful Sunday morning at Pearl Harbor will never be forgotten. Their sacrifice has brought a new unity to us.
I went to the Battle of Midway, of course, and I've had so many people ask me why I wanted to go. I said I wanted to turn the tables. Shortly after the conflict started, FDR called his military staff together and said, "Gentlemen, I want you to devise a plan to bomb Tokyo." They said, "Mr. President, that's impossible. We have no aircraft with that capability." He managed to get up out of his wheelchair and said, "You know, some time ago I was pretty active, playing tennis, swimming, and I wondered why God put me in this wheelchair." He said, "Now I know I can look into the eyes of my military and see defeat." He said, "Now don't tell me it's impossible." That's when Lieutenant Colonel Jimmy Doolittle was called, told to round up a group of capable flyers and start training in the B-25 on very short field takeoffs and landings. He lined up the gentlemen and says, "We're going on a mission, which I can't tell you what it is or where it is, but it's a mission from what you probably won't return. If you still want to go, step forward." Every man did. April the 2nd, 1942, they were moved aboard the Hornet and were then told what their mission was. April 18, en route to Tokyo, but 650 miles short of Tokyo and 250 miles short of their planned launching point, they were spotted by a Japanese fishing boat. Admiral Halsey on the Enterprise says, "I know our position has been reported." He turned both ships into the wind and flank speed launched 16 25s. They all reached their targets, dropped their bombs, but due to the extended distance they had for the early takeoff, some of them didn't make it. One gentleman died when he bailed out of the aircraft, 2 died in a crash, 8 were captured, 3 were executed. Our naval intelligence began receiving numerous Japanese codes using the code letters AF and AO. We knew one stood for the Midway and the other one stood for the Aleutians, but couldn't tell which. Our chief of intelligence told Admiral Nimitz, "I've got a plan to find out what they are." He said we can send out an uncoded message saying Midway has just had a freshwater condenser failure. The Japanese took the bait. They said AF has just had a freshwater condenser failure. We still didn't know which place they planned to hit, but Nimitz believed it would be Midway. Washington was not in full agreement. They sent a courier to talk to Nimitz, and as he asked him, says, "What if you're wrong?" Nimitz said, "Did Washington send you here to tell me not to go to Midway?" He said, "No." He said, "Then you return to Washington." He then sent a small task force to the Aleutians, in disguise, of course, sent the rest of the fleet to Midway, positioned the carriers in one spot and the rest of the fleet in the other. My squadron left Pearl Harbor April 26, 1942, and began the search. On June the 3rd, we found them, 450 miles northeast of Midway, moving towards Midway under a weather front. The first aircraft that found the fleet sent a message, but it was garbled. My plane then picked up the message and sent it to Midway and to the Yorktown. On June the 4th, 6 o'clock in the morning, they hit Midway. The Marines on Midway were equipped with 3-inch guns on the ground and 27 Brewster Buffalo fighters. They sent 27 aloft, only 7 aircraft returned. They were damaged beyond further flight. For the first 2 hours, we were definitely losing the battle. We had 3 squadrons in the air, led by Lieutenant Commander Wade McCluskey. They're airborne for 2 hours, running low on fuel, but he says we're going to press on just a little longer. Moments later, he seen the white wake of a fast-moving destroyer, and he said that ship has to be racing to join the main fleet. They found 3 aircraft carriers diving from 20,000 feet They inflicted damage to sink all three in 4 minutes. They were aided by two factors. Japanese fighters were at low altitude, protecting their ships against our torpedo plane. Also, Admiral Nagumo had received word the damage to Midway was slight. He said, we'll rearm with bombs and go back to Midway. Yamamoto said, no, we'll rearm with torpedoes and go after their fleet. The Hornet had launched 30 torpedo aircraft. Only one man returned instant gate. They then launched 15 more. Only 4 of those survived. After the 3 were sunk, Nagumo changed direction. Admiral Halsey called Nimitz and he says, we just sunk 3 aircraft carriers. Do you think that's enough? He said, hell no, I want the 4th one. The Soryu, which was found sometime later, was also sunk. The next day, all these search planes were out looking for downed seamen. Late in the afternoon, we found 2 gentlemen in a life raft, but we were low on fuel at the time. We radioed a sister ship. They landed, picked up the gentlemen, and took them to Midway. Next day, I returned to Pearl Harbor. July the 2nd, I was on my way to Guadalcanal. Our first stop was Noumea, New Caledonia. At that time, we were definitely losing that battle. Admiral Halsey came aboard, shook hands with everybody, and he says, gentlemen, we'll kill every son of a bitch on this island, and I'll be right there with you. In 43, I received a message to go to San Diego to help commission a new WWII squadron and return to the Pacific. When I got there, my orders were changed. I started training in the B-24 Liberator. Spent 2 months there training, moved to Argentina, Newfoundland for another 2 months. April 1943, I was in Dunkswell, Devonshire, England, where I started anti-submarine patrol of the English Channel and the Bay of Biscay, which is the western coast of France. I flew 56 missions over the channel.
In the early days, it was a European war, fought halfway across the world from home. And the first job for many of them was to escort troop convoys across the Bay of Biscay. A constant watch had to be kept for U-boats and enemy aircraft, and the guns manned at all times in case of attack. For 8 hours at a stretch, and sometimes longer, they patrolled, cold, cramped, tense, peering into the glare for the first sign of danger. The major threat was the long-range German fighter planes, faster, better equipped, and flown by men well trained to attack.
Most people never even heard of the Navy having B-24s. But the British were trying to stop the German U-boats in the channel. Was not effective. The Navy commissioned 5 squadrons of 24s. I was in the first one, BB-103. But the 5 squadrons flew 6,450 missions over the channel, sunk 8 submarines, and damaged 4 more. I got credit for one of them. I think it's going down in history as one of the longest battles with the submarine. 1st of June, 1944, I was transferred back to Chincoteague, Virginia to help commission a new B-24 squadron. But the war was drilling down a little at that time. The squadron was never commissioned. I spent a year there as its flight engineer, was transferred to Pensacola, Florida for another year. I went to Patuxent River, Maryland, where I stayed until April 1948 when I was honorably discharged.
The day of days for America and her allies. Crowds before the White House await the announcement from the President.
The unconditional surrender of Japan.
It was a great relief. Everybody was shaking hands and kissing each other and whatever, but it was a glorious feeling. You know you've been awful lucky if you made a lot of missions and survived it unhurt. But there was always a feeling when you boarded that aircraft, you wondered what was going to happen. You knew you had to stay alert. You had to be very aggressive You had to forget about everything and do the job, and it's difficult to do. But when I joined the Navy, I took an oath, which I tried to live up to. When I retired and I started playing golf with my friends, I never even told them that I was World War II veteran, let alone Pearl Harbor. But I met a young lady who started asking me a lot of questions, and she said, "You got to come out of the closet. You got to start talking to people." I immediately booked a flight to Washington, and there was a throng of people 200 yards long on the tarmac lined up to greet our plane. Went in the terminal, it was full of people to greet us, ladies running around and kissing you and all that stuff, and it's then I realized that there's people out there that remembered and still cared. That was 12 years ago. Since then, I've been getting presentations all over the country. I gave 52 last year. I tell all these youngsters that the knowledge wasn't as necessary then when I grew up as it is now. It's certainly necessary now. When they see the American flag, treasure it, and remember one thing, you live in the greatest country in the world. It's not always right, but it's still the best in the world. Well, of course, I was at the Battle of Midway and so forth, all that, but showed me the movie in private. It's probably 80%, They showed pictures of the dive bombers coming in, with the canopy open on the aircraft, a leather helmet unbuttoned and flapping in the breeze. That doesn't happen. I was so disappointed on some of the information that they didn't give. Search planes were never mentioned. If you can imagine what would have happened at Midway, it could have been quite different if we hadn't have found the location of that fleet. And one thing that has really disturbed me, after one of the commemorations last year, Secretary of the Navy came on and he praised every unit in the Navy except the division that flight patrol planes. They weren't mentioned. Very disturbing.